Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion on a day in the life of a Kubernetes engineer. To set some context, we usually talk about our successes with Kubernetes, how we're running multiple workloads, off late AI workloads and whatnot. But seldom do we focus on the people who keep these clusters up and running and the failures that they run into and all the other issues that they run into. So to shed some light on that, to talk about the real issues of a Kubernetes engineer, what is a Kubernetes engineer? What skills do you need to be a Kubernetes engineer? We thought of having this open discussion, and I have an esteemed set of panelists over here with me. So why don't you all start introducing yourselves, and at the same time, tell us more about how you got to be like a Kubernetes engineer. Like, why did you decide to be a Kubernetes engineer? You want to go ahead, Shane? Okay, cool.
So I'm Shane, and I started my role as a Kubernetes engineer after working for a managed security services department in this big consulting company. And I actually really liked my team quite a bit there, but most of our clients were really risk-averse organizations, and they definitely didn't want Kubernetes. They were hesitant to try new things. They wanted established best practices, very, experience justifiable, those kinds of things. And I had a friend who I'd previously worked with, and he'd left the military about the same time as me and gone to work at this company called Shopify. And he was always sending these messages about these cool things he was working on, this newfangled Kubernetes thing, and all this cool stuff they were trying, and they were going to be moving to the cloud, and they were collaborating with this team from Google with Greg Castle and Micah and these great people. And so I was seeing all of these things that he was doing, and I really wanted to be a part of it. So I ended up joining Shopify in 2017. And that was when Kubernetes was still pretty new, and a lot of the things that we have now didn't exist. And it was really, really exciting to get to kind of build those with them.
Perfect. I think just the other day, some of us were talking about 2017. There was no concept of a controller. A controller was just being formed. It was very difficult to get a controller up and running. And now here we are, like building on top of so many controllers and so on and so forth. It's lovely. Nikhita, you want to?
I don't think there were actually controllers at the time. I think there weren't even CRDs. I think it was like third-party resources. But anyway, I'm Nikhita. I'm a principal engineer at Broadcom. I got started by building a lot of features for CRDs in Kubernetes itself. So I've been a maintainer for Kubernetes for a while. I've been a part of the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee, and in the past, I've also been the co-chair for KubeCon. And yeah, that's kind of how I started with Kubernetes, was through an internship, the Google Summer of Code internship program. Started contributing to it, using it, joined a lot of vendors that were building products for Kubernetes, on top of Kubernetes, and that's how I got started.
Perfect.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Kasper. I currently work not as a Kubernetes engineer, actually. I changed role after we submitted this. So I'm actually doing DevRel now, so it's kind of a different game. But I used to be a staff platform engineer at a company called Lunar. And I got into this actually when I was writing my master thesis in 2015. We've heard about this microservices stuff and thought, hey, that could be fun to write something about that and figure out how to actually run all of these things. And then we found this project online of someone from Finland, a 16-year-old guy, apparently did something of migrating Kubernetes to ARM. And I said, that could be a fun thing to do a master thesis on, running microservices on a Raspberry Pi Kubernetes cluster. So that's what we did back then. And that's how I sort of got into to this game.
Master's thesis. It sounds amazing. So we've got like Shane coming from joining his friend and colleague at Shopify. And then Nikhita starting from an internship. You are from a master academic sort of a background, getting into Kubernetes. What about you, Micah?
Yeah, I'm Micah Hausler. I'm a principal engineer at AWS. I'm also now a Kubernetes contributor. I'm on the Kubernetes Security Committee, as well as a co-chair for SIG Auth. I got started with Kubernetes as a Kubernetes engineer way back in 2016. I ran my first Kubernetes cluster, and this was before, on AWS at the time, and this was before COPS and before even really kubeatom. So it was hand rolling it out, and then this guy wrote this blog post called, or this GitHub about Kubernetes, and his name was Kelsey. And I was like, what is this thing he built? And I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's what I just built. That's great. But I was working at a small startup. I was part of a 2-person DevOps org, or team, I guess, and with supporting developers. And we were using cloud and building small services. And I was like, okay, I know container, because this is 2016, Docker had just come out, right? I was like, we're going to use Docker, we're going to use containers. We need to orchestrate this. And at the time, there were a lot of alternatives. There was Mesos, and I tried Mesos and Amazon's product. And Docker Swarm was a thing, for those of you who remember. And then I tried Kubernetes, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is solving the problems that I have. And that's really where I got my start, and then started contributing to it as not at AWS, but as working at a startup.
Perfect. So you've been one of the warriors from the container orchestration wars.
That's right.
All right. So now that you know what this discussion is going to be like, we'll dive right into it. So I am Rajas. I work at Broadcom doing all things Kubernetes. I am also a contributor of Kubernetes and currently active in CNCF Technical Advisory Group for Runtime, Working Group Artificial Intelligence, so on and so forth. All right, cool. So let's dive into this, right? Like, help me understand what do you think is a Kubernetes engineer? Because when this term comes to my mind, I would say that it's something wherein if you're touching any aspect of Kubernetes, be it contributing to upstream or using it for like downstream things, or being an end user of Kubernetes, or advocating for Kubernetes, I would still term that as a Kubernetes engineer. But how would you all define it? Like, what comes to your mind?
I think if you've spent enough time with Kubernetes to get frustrated by it, you are a Kubernetes engineer. But just to show fans, who here thinks that they are a Kubernetes engineer? Okay.
All right.
That's a good number.
I almost think of it like a car, right? Like, what are you a car? Are you involved in a car, right? Do you build cars? Do you sell cars? Do you work with cars?
Do you drive cars?
Do you drive cars, right? Yeah, no. I mean, if you're driving Kubernetes, you are in my opinion, you're a Kubernetes engineer. And driving being if you touch it. I think that's a great example.
Yeah, maybe another question for the audience. How many of you are sort of identifying as a platform engineer instead? Oh, that's more hands actually, because I think that's also a kind of an interesting discussion, right? Is what is a Kubernetes engineer, and what is the difference from a platform engineer, and is there a difference? I think this really depends on the company that you work for, how big it is, how many employees you have. I guess the more people you have, the more specialized you become, and then the more closer you're probably becoming to only touching Kubernetes, and then you're probably closer to being like a real, I don't know, Kubernetes engineer instead of a platform engineer, which is more about like, you know, we were talking about Lego just before, like putting bricks together and sort of building a platform and making it easy for developers. So I think for me, that's sort of the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think a Kubernetes engineer actually exists. And I don't mean that you're all figments of my imagination, of course. I think it's just something that you're doing at a moment in time, but really what your focus is solving some kind of a business problem with technology. And I think a lot of that gets lost, and you tend to be, especially if you are a more junior role, or if you're at a very large company with very prescriptive roles, then your day-to-day might be editing YAML files and then trying to figure out why things aren't working when they don't, and silently celebrating, I hope, when things do work. And as you kind of move up, or as you're in a more flexible organization, you might pivot from just solving a very specific problem with a tool that you're given, Kubernetes, to kind of questioning how you're going to solve a larger business problem with Kubernetes. And so you might be moving from just editing those YAML files to considering, well, every time somebody forgets to indent this YAML file, my application is exposed to the internet. So instead of just going through and indenting their YAML files for them, now there's an opportunity for me to solve a bigger business problem. I can create automation. I can create a platform and that's going to indent the YAML files for them. And then as you continue to move on, you think, well, why are they editing these YAML files at all? Why don't we automate that for them? And then you've got a more mature platform, and at some point you become in a place where you can ask if Kubernetes is even really the right tool for this job, and if so, what can you be doing to make sure that it stays that way? How can you improve Kubernetes so that it continues to mature, it continues to be the tool that people can use for that? And I've been really excited to see that Kubernetes, for every problem it introduces, it seems to also introduce a solution, but then it also introduces another problem to that solution. So you can continue down that path for quite a while, and the more experience you gain, the more you're able to adapt the tool that you have to the things you need it for. But I really think that there's a key there to being able to decide if it's the right tool at all.
Absolutely. I think we touched upon like a bunch of things, but what comes through this is there's a spectrum, right? Depends where you are at your career, which company you work at, what's the scale of the company, what do you want to get out of Kubernetes, what problem are you trying to solve with Kubernetes, and then you can decide what kind of a Kubernetes engineer you are, right? And I think one of the things that you brought up was like the whole business aspect of it. Do you think Kubernetes engineers should also be thinking about the business side of the product or business goals of their employer?
Yeah, especially as you kind of mature more and advance in your career, I think you need to be more aware of those. Certainly there's a place for people who have a real knack for the technical side and very little interest in the business side, and I hope that can be kind of protected and we can keep those people doing what they're good at too. But they don't exist in a vacuum, and so I think if you're not solving real problems with Kubernetes, then your time is limited. You're not going to be able to just keep doing that forever. So I think as you move on, it is pretty important to consider what it's actually doing.
Absolutely, yep.
I just wanted to add to that. So I think all engineers should know about this. So you cannot build something without knowing how that's going to get used or how that's going to affect your customers. Otherwise, you just don't know what you're building is right or wrong. So understanding that business perspective is important. It's also important when you're talking to executives because they want business solutions, they don't want engineering solutions. So having that kind of mindset where you're at least able to switch between both sides, that's important.
Yeah, maybe just also a small comment. I think we, as tech people, right, are in many cases looking initially at the tech rather than the problem. At least I've been doing that in the past, and I've also when I came back from a conference, it's always, hey, we need to try out this new project, but I'm not really sure what problem it actually solves or what value it will bring to the company. But I just saw it, and it looks freaking awesome, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we definitely need to think about the value and start with the problem instead of the tech, and then figure out what will actually, solve that problem.
Yeah, I think tech is a tool, but at the end of the day, it's about problem solving that.
Yeah, exactly. You need to provide some value to your business. It's Absolutely. After all, who is, I guess, paying for you being an employee. So
yeah, right. Micah, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think as you know, most of us, even probably in this room, right? We all work somewhere. On your name tag, it says where you work, and I think that just reflects the nature of what we do as an industry, right? We are solving problems for an end use case. Unless this is not a crypto conference where we're all maybe not even all, but some of us independently wealthy and just doing it for fun, right? We're doing this for a point. So I think that does matter. And as called out, like to varying degrees, if you are more technical oriented and that's just what you do for fun, and that's great. But I think all of us have some part of us that has to be aware of what matters to our business.
Yeah, I think problem solving kind of is the theme, or that's something that I would take away from this point of discussion. Okay, moving on. What misconceptions do you see associated with the term Kubernetes engineer?
I think there's a misconception that all Kubernetes engineers love YAML. I don't think that's the case. How many here actually love YAML? Oh, that's a few hands.
Okay, that's great.
I think that's a misconception that that we all love YAML, because at least for us, when I was working at the former company at Lunar, we were trying to really hide all the complexities of all the Kubernetes away from our engineers, and really try to make it as simple for whoever was using this. Also for other teams that were like building platforms on top of what we were providing. So I think it's a misconception that we all love YAML.
Yeah, I think this was also called out in the keynotes yesterday, that we need to be thinking about the user experience of Kubernetes in this next decade.
I think one other misconception that seems common in my experience is that once you have the label Kubernetes applied to you, which probably most of us here do, everyone thinks that that is your hammer and everything looks like a nail and you're going to only use Kubernetes to solve those problems, right? Absolutely. And I think being pragmatic about problem solving, Kubernetes does solve some real problems. Obviously, as we said, it creates more too, but it also isn't the solution to every problem. Yes, control, the Kube API and the Kube resource model and writing controllers and CRDs is very powerful, and you can do a lot with that. It doesn't solve every problem. You wouldn't want to build your system of record on Kubernetes for your business application necessarily, but it's a great infrastructure tool. So I think that's probably another common misconception that I see, is that people think, oh, you're with Kubernetes, you drink the Kool-Aid, and you think that can solve every problem.
Absolutely, yeah. Shane, Nikhita.
Yeah, so in 2020, I think the loudest people on the internet all had the misconception that you need Kubernetes for everything. And in 2025, I'm worried that the loudest people on the internet all have the misconception that you don't need Kubernetes anywhere, or that it's always the wrong tool, or that it adds complexity unnecessarily. And so when you see somebody and they take their Ubuntu VM and it's running their SQL database and that's all it does, and they move it to Kubernetes, they have a bad experience, and then they think, oh, this Kubernetes thing is terrible. Why do I need a deployment? Why do I need a stateful set? Why do I need all this backing storage? This is just ridiculous. I can't do anything more easily or faster or better than I could before. But if you look at a problem of deploying a web application that's stateless, and you want it to be able to scale up very rapidly, you want it to be able to scale down very rapidly, and you want to be able to change it 1,000 times a day, then Kubernetes is absolutely perfect. And so I wouldn't blame a Phillips screwdriver for not being a slotted or a flathead screwdriver. It's just one tool for a specific purpose. And if you use it for that purpose, I think Kubernetes does a very good job. And for most of my career, it's been improving and getting better at that. So I'm excited to see that, and I hope that people kind of look at it for what it is instead of holding it up to be a kind of cure-all for all of your web-based problems, or on the other hand, just being a kind of relic of a zero interest rate environment that we were in before.
Yeah, I think there are nuances that we need to consider. We can't be at the extremes of the spectrum. Earlier today, I was talking to Dims, and he was telling me that we are in this decade of adoption, right, and not just innovation. So it's that aspect that we're going to focus on, like what problem are we solving? Does Kubernetes fit in over here? What part of Kubernetes fits in, and things like that. Awesome. All right. Moving on. Can we get a quick show of hands if any one of y'all have been pinged or called at 3 a.m. in the morning because a cluster went down or someone tried to do an upgrade and there was an API deprecation and things like that, and now it wouldn't upgrade. The upgrade failed. Okay, we have quite a few people going through the Kubernetes debacles. So have you all been involved in any of the production failures? Were you responsible for one? Do you want to talk about any of those stories? Yeah.
Sure. I'd been at Shopify for maybe 7 or 8 months. And I mentioned before, a lot of the tooling wasn't as sophisticated. It wasn't as mature as it is right now. And one thing that we had was these proxies that they had to keep a connection open for some hours. And it was this really arduous process to do cluster upgrades. And being on the infrastructure security team, I was kind of championing these patch rollouts because we want to get rid of the vulnerabilities that are in the old version. And one thing that is always frustrating about Kubernetes is that there's very little backwards compatibility. I think they promise kind of one minor version will still be compatible-ish, and sometimes that's not even true. So these cluster upgrades were always a pretty difficult task, especially with this kind of long time thing that I had to worry about from some business logic. That's much, much better now anyway. So the way I was going about this was I'd have to go through every single node in our entire environment. It was thousands, and I would have to cordon them to make sure that no new workloads got deployed there, and then I'd have to wait 6 hours, and then I'd have to go drain them. And so I was using one script that would very, very quickly do the cordoning. And so I just ran it all in parallel for each cluster. And then I had another kind of like one-liner for bash that I was supposed to be using for draining. And it was supposed to do those sequentially. And you can probably see where this is going. I accidentally used the parallel one for the really bad thing and the sequential one for the thing that wasn't so bad. And so it just, all of a sudden, a whole cluster just disappeared. And we had pretty good resilience, but losing an entire cluster is not something that most environments can handle. We didn't have the tooling we have now to just shift traffic somewhere else. So that was extremely embarrassing for me. Luckily, we did a retro. We looked at what went wrong. And it's like, well, why is this new guy running these commands from his laptop to do everything anyway? And so we kind of learned from that, and over the years we become much more sophisticated. That couldn't happen today. There's just no way that we would be able to do that.
Bash is not always your friend, right?
It's not.
Yeah, I think the important aspect that's I'm taking away from this is we're all humans at the end of the day, right? So it's important that you're calling this out, that hey, it was a mistake I committed, so it's fine, like, it's just a cluster, we can fix that. So it's especially important for the people getting into the community or attending KubeCon for the first time. It can be intimidating. Yesterday it was called out in the keynotes that someone doing get POC can be like intimidating for some people. So it's vital that we focus on the human failures as well, and the human error aspect of this. So thanks for calling that out. Yep.
Yeah, I have not a complete similar story, but something also done in production. Also, this was also a little bit early on, before we also had GitHubs, before the processes, everything was, we also had a lot of bash scripting, but that day I was doing things with the good old kube control. I needed to upgrade the Nginx ingress controller, and then suddenly all of the pods just disappeared, and no traffic was coming in to our environment, which was, again, a similar situation, very embarrassing, trying to scramble, trying to fix everything, figure out what is going on, something with an apply, append, figuring out at the end, I could just replace the deployment, and then everything came back up again. So yeah, I've also tried that on multiple occasions. But yeah, after this, GitHubs came, and it sort of made this a little bit easier for us, and also removed us from actually doing kube control applies in the cluster and stuff like that. But yeah.
That's a great call for GitHubs as well, because it's the maturity that we've shown as a community, right, over a period of 10 years, how much we've evolved to automate things, to minimize these human errors.
One other things that we also were struggling a little bit with in the early days was also really cordoning, draining the nodes, doing it in with good time in between, just to make sure that everything was sort of coming up again and going down. And so we also tried to do some manual scripting and writing a Go integration, because we were missing actually things in COPS back then, like to do rolling up grades with actual time in between the nodes and stuff like that. So yeah, we've also done a lot of hacky things to sort of get around the quirkiness of Kubernetes.
Totally.
So I just wanted to offer another perspective from a maintainer of Kubernetes or contributor to Kubernetes perspective. So at one of my jobs, I've had a situation where we had a job that was managing an authentication service for some of our customers' clusters and so on. And the pods for that job would just not show up. Like, no matter what configuration changes we made, they would start, but then they would just crash immediately. So we were trying so hard, but no matter what logs we checked, what configuration changes we did, it would just not work. So after digging in a little bit more, we thought, why not just check the Kubernetes code base, check the job controller, try to understand what's it actually doing behind the scenes. And that's when we found out that there was a recent, a change in a feature gate that went in somewhat recently that made them, so instead of exponential backoff, it was a linear backoff that was happening. So it meant that it was this, the service was just not resilient enough whenever the infrastructure, there's some infrastructure issues. So that's when we had to jump in and actually fix the bug in the controller itself. And that was important to us at that time. We could create an issue on the Kubernetes repo, wait for the maintainers to come and fix it, but it was really, it was not trivial, right? So this was a change in the core controller itself, and we could wait for that to happen, but I really didn't have the time for that fix to land. So in cases like this, it's kind of important to get your hands dirty, get involved a little bit more deeply in Kubernetes, and show up there. And maybe, Micah, you have probably some stories like that.
Also from the maintainer sort of perspective, I think it was one of the earlier contributions in Kubernetes for me where Kubernetes has security issues. Surprise! There was a issue where you could port forward to a node, but if you overrode the node's IP address with the cloud credential IP address, you could port forward to the cloud credentials of the API server. It was really fun. And so I wrote a fix for that. And in the code, I was earlier in my career, I wrote the fix and I was like, hey, I think there might be, even in this fix, there might be an issue. And someone who was reviewing it was like, nah, that'll never happen. Like, who would ever have a crazy DNS server that replies with different results for one request versus the other? And then it turns out a year or two later, I'm on the security committee in Kubernetes, and we get a security report, and there's a time of use bug. And I wrote that code. Great. Not only in fixing a CVE, I also created one. And that was less of a page in the middle of the night, but still oh no, we have to fix that quickly, and get that out to the community as well as a fix.
These are great points, right? Like the whole community perspective as well. So one of the things that I did as part of this panel discussion is ask fellow Kubernetes engineers from the community, maintainers, end users, on what questions would they have to these panelists. And one thing that came up was, how do you keep track of changes that go in upstream? And I think the topics that we talked about just now, having a presence in the Kubernetes upstream community, digging through the code base, or having influence as well in the community, having a meaningful seat in the community matters. But at the same time, how do you keep a track of changes that go in KK?
It's hard. I think the most hardest way, but the best ways to get involved in some form or capacity in the project. And the easiest way is probably to do what you all are already doing now, is attend KubeCons, because this is where you get the big picture. Otherwise, like, join the mailing list. I wouldn't say, I mean, Slack channels, sure, but there's a lot of noise that goes through. So I think mailing lists and such avenues would be the best.
Yeah, I think probably some of the best methods to learn about what's going on is, if it depends on how granular do you want to get. Do you want to know the day-to-day of what's being developed and what might be developed? That's where you're going to get involved in a special interest group or a SIG. You can read the SIG notes. You can just get up to speed on what's already been discussed. They're all online on Google Docs. If you want a little bit higher level, the release notes, even for in-progress branches, is a great way. And then finally, if you kind of just want a very high level, there's a release blog on the Kubernetes blog for every release, and it's great. It has a great summary. It's not so super detailed, but it has a great summary. I read it personally every release just because I'm involved in very specific parts of the project, but I'm not as deeply involved in SIG Node or somewhere else. And it's fun for me to learn, and that's the place where I go to learn.
I just want to plus one on all of this. What we did initially on was really, we created a meetup group also just to discuss things, so have peers to actually discuss what is going on, what is the next thing, what are you doing, why are you doing this, and get feedback on how we are seeing the world. I think that was really important in our early Kubernetes journey, to be involved in community in that way, for just having some local peers to actually discuss the things with as well was important for us. But definitely second the other points as well on reading the release notes is a really good one.
Absolutely. But from an end user perspective, I'm just curious, how often do you all upgrade your Kubernetes clusters?
Oh, we've got a great story for that now. So after I broke everything years ago, we tried our best to stop breaking things so often. So now it's all GitOps for those kinds of changes. And then kind of on top of the regular GitOps, there's another layer, and I've actually seen this with cloud providers. There's kind of like fleets of clusters now, as well as the individual clusters, and so you can have redundancy for redundancy, and we make a lot of use of automation. So the original change is a thing that you can click or open in a PR, and then that triggers some automation that's going to spin up new things to replace the old things, and there's a whole elaborate system of soak times and automated checks to make sure, okay, Shane missed the the breaking change in the patch notes. He didn't follow the advice of this panel, and so he decided to go ahead with this upgrade without changing the thing that breaks. He also didn't talk to the other people who are using it, and so now there's a problem. Well, as soon as it goes out, it's going to hit a staging cluster, hopefully break there, and if not, it's going to a canary cluster, and so we'll have the absolute minimum disruption possible. And so we don't see a lot of issues with our cluster upgrades now, but it does require a fair bit of additional tooling. A platform, if anyone's familiar with those, built kind of on top of Kubernetes. So I do hope some of these things that we've worked on will make their way back into upstream, and we'll see some of those trends become universal, and everyone will get the benefit from them instead of individual companies doing it themselves.
Sure, definitely testing and having in a GitOps story definitely makes sense. All right, I have a bunch of more questions, but surely we're running short of time. Maybe we should do a version of this, of a day in the life of platform engineer in Atlanta later this year. But I think we have to get to the end of this discussion. We're running short on time. But if the audience has questions, we'll be happy to take those. There's a microphone over there, and we should be able to take a question or two. No questions? Okay, looks like I exhausted all the set of questions then. Okay, all right. Okay, maybe we'll do a version of this in Atlanta. We don't know. But this has been a pleasure talking to you all. I think we had a bunch of insights on a day in the life of Kubernetes engineer, what happens behind the scenes, the different aspects of the spectrum and the nuances involved. So thank you so much. Thank you for attending.